Welcome everyone, my name is Eugeniusz Romer and this is a YouTube channel of Układ Sił, a Polish foreign policy magazine. Today we are in Berlin, we are discussing international relations of Germany, and I'm hosting Rebecca Schönenbach, who is an expert in the field of international relations and security policy. Hello.
Thank you for the invitation.
And as far as I know, you mostly focus on terrorism. So I think this is an issue in Germany. And I think migration in general is the second most important topic for the German people before the elections. So why is it so? Why is migration policy so important for the Germans?
Well, it's probably the link between migration and the criminal cases we have and terrorism. And now we have, in the past weeks, there was like every third to fourth week a deadly terror attack, mostly on a lower scale, like the kid that was killed in Augsburg recently. But there have been others like Magdeburg, where there was a Saudi perpetrator who killed a number of people on a Christmas market and so on. And that, of course, raises the attention on the topic. And it's very often conflated, migration with terrorism, migration with criminality, migration with other topics. But of course, they're related, so you can't separate them. And then there's the logistical side, apart from the topic of security. It's that most of the mayors of small towns are saying publicly in the media that it's not possible anymore to process the influx of migrants in Germany. And that is the other topic that hit the news recently.
So how the main political parties are reacting to this issue and changing maybe their programs before the elections, and how they want to accommodate to this situation?
Well, nearly all of them changed their view during the past 2 years. Also, the government coalition made some efforts to reduce the numbers of migration. We had roughly 250,000 migration applications, asylum applications the last year. It's been in 2023, 350,000, so it's 100,000 down. So they already introduced some measures, they already introduced some border control and so on. So all of the parties have in their election programs now some sort of restriction to migration. But the approaches, of course, are very, very different. And also the reception within the party members is very, very different.
Yeah, I think we will discuss it further. But my question is also, why actually those people who are migrants and they live in Germany conducting those terrorist attacks? Because the cliche is people from, for example, Middle East, they come to Germany because of the social welfare. So why would they try to destroy or terrorize the country they actually want to live in?
Well, there are two different sorts of terror attacks. One is of the lone actors. So a lot of those people acting alone have some condition of mental illness, some sort of self-radicalization. They're not connected, and they very often perpetrate crimes with either knives or beating people up. It's not always deadly. It's some sort of mix between real terrorism, killing somebody due to jihadist propaganda, but it could also be that they just rob people, and that's increasingly. And of course, it's a good question why, but very often they come from a different jurisdiction. They're not used to being processed if they commit several acts that they're relatively, in their eyes, mildly punished just by giving them fines or by being on probation. They don't really receive that as a punishment. So they go on because they don't understand the values and the system, how it works here. And then there's the organized groups, which perpetrate bigger crimes, bigger terrorist attack, like, for example, in 2015 in Paris. And they're way more dangerous, but those terrorist attacks are less likely. But if they happen, then, of course, it's very deadly. And they, of course, are totally radicalized and they want to overthrow the system. And between those is an ecosystem. We do have Islamic organizations. Most of them have ties to extremist groups, and they sort of create an ecosystem, not only in Germany, but all over Europe, where radicalization grows. Kids are radicalized at home, in schools, in mosques, in sport clubs, and so on. And then out of this kind of scene grows more radicalism. And it's become way more dangerous since October 7th, since the Hamas massacre.
Do you think that any political party or force in Germany has a solution for this problem? Because closing mosques wouldn't be a very good idea, because it could radicalize those people even more. And I think this is against all the values that the German people represent, right? Because religious tolerance is very important here in this country. So what kind of solution can you provide?
Well, one of the solutions would be to understand that people are not integrated via religion. The migration policy in Germany is sort of, imagine you have to flee. Yeah, you have to flee from Poland for whatever reason. And you arrive in an Asian country. And once you arrive, people assess you as being European, Polish, so you're a Christian. And you're not being integrated in that country because you're an individual who had to flee, and you might be an engineer, you might be a social worker, whatever skills you have. But the only thing that is attributed to you is being Christian. And then you're sent to church, not any church, but a radicalized church. And that radicalized church is getting all the funds and getting the integration money. And that is sort of the policy that we had for the last 20 years. And it's not working. You can't integrate people via group attributes. You have to see them as individuals. They might be Muslim, they might be not. They might be believing, they might not be practicing, they might be atheist, but it's not the thing that's going to integrate them. And we have to learn. We don't do that with any other group. The only group being sort of integrated by being a religious group are Muslims. We do not do that with Vietnamese people. We don't do that with other sorts of migrants, wherever they come from. And that has to stop, because it's also a racist connotation. You don't see them as potential. You don't see them as individuals with individual rights. The only thing you see is those are Muslims. And that is a result of the propaganda by the Islamic organizations in Germany and in Europe, who try to further that sort of thinking and are trying to represent themselves as speaking for those people, which they do not. But that is what happened. And we have to, the first thing is to stop that sort of policy.
So do you think this is the reason why the people who are here for the second or third generation, they radicalize, actually, because they have Muslim origins, but they are German citizens. And I think we observed that during the ISIS, let's say, insurgents in the Middle East, because many people called foreign terrorist fighters, they came from Europe actually to fight in the Middle East, and they were European citizens.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of the results is that the second, third, and fourth generation is more radicalized than their parents ever were, because they're seen as Muslims, they're treated as Muslims, not as individuals, and that, of course, also is perceived by them as being racist and as being discriminatory, because they can't succeed in being anything else than Muslims. So it's both sides. It's not to not attribute them any responsibility. Of course, they're responsible for their own actions, but they're still being raised in this kind of ecosystem. They're not taken out. It's an ecosystem that has been prepared by Islamic organization with extremist ties. And then they self-identify and they feel empowered by this kind of identification of being a more radical Muslim than any other. And that, of course, leads people to join the Islamic State. We also had quite a few numbers of people joining HTS in Syria when there still were Islamists in the government. I mean, they're self-styled new Islamists now, but they were quite radical before. So we exported terrorism, sort of, and also very violent terrorism.
So do you think that social policy in Germany somehow contributed to this problem? Because some people say and believe, and they even provide data, that there are many, let's say, Muslim clans in Berlin, for example, or in various places in Germany. And like the men, they have a few wives, they have many children, and they get a lot of social money, social benefits. And this is actually the financial aid that they get to organize this kind of activity.
Well, I think that is rather a new phenomenon, second and third wives, that was not very widespread with the Turkish community, who migrated in the 70s and is quite well integrated. It's a phenomenon in some parts of the Arab migration groups that came here, but it's not very widespread. But it's a difficult thing, because first, when they arrived, they were not allowed to work, which also led them to profit from social benefits, because what could they do? They didn't have the permission to work. That changed now, but the organized crime groups that we have since the 80s, and who are very well organized, mostly with Lebanese ties, some Palestinian ties, had one of the reasons why they went into organized crime was that they were not allowed to work. It's not the only reason, but that was one of the reasons. Since that changed, most of them are very well integrated, but then there's another factor, that they married their children to new immigrants. So they didn't marry their children to people being raised here, but they wanted to make sure that their culture of origin was being upheld, and very often forced their children to marry someone who then immigrated here. So every time you have somebody who is well integrated in the second, third generation, and they have to marry someone who's not integrated, that kind of resets the whole migration policy. And also within the families, then the pressure from countries where they have more traditional or fundamental values raises, because then, of course, the family of the one just migrated is also asking questions. Why do you have only 2 children? Why is the head of your daughter not covered? Things like that. So the pressure raised significantly. And then, of course, since 2015, there's more influx of fundamental people who are fundamentally inclined to a fundamentally inclined view of Islam, Afghans and so on. And a lot of the Turkish women reported that they're being pressured since 2015 into being more religiously observant, which they were not before.
So how do you think the Germans actually react to those phenomena? Because several years ago, AfD, a party called populist and radical, let's say far right, it was supported by about 6% of voters, and now it's the second political force in Germany. Actually, it can really meddle into the democratic system of the country. So, do you think that this is a reaction to those problems?
Partly, yes, because if you see the polls, even the voters of the Green Party, which was very pro-migration and still is, 70% of them say that the migration policy has to change, even in this range. So people realize there's a problem. They're not necessarily opposing migration per se, but they want that there's stricter controls, that there should be an enforcement that only those who really have to flee can come, and the others should be stopped at the borders. So it sort of influenced the political landslide, because most of the parties avoided the problem. And only now the Conservative Party, CDU, under Friedrich Merz, changed course. For a very long time, under Angela Merkel, who introduced this new migration policy, the party also said that they do not want to change the rules and they do not want to restrict migration. And as long as nobody talked about it and the topic was sort of avoided or played down, then of course the only party raising the subject, and not in a very good way, not in a way that would make anything better, was the AfD. And of course that contributed. And if you see the numbers, especially young voters vote for the AfD. And that is also because they encounter in their daily lives problems. They see problems at school, They're being beaten up in sport clubs. A lot of them have been robbed, their mobiles taken from them, and so on. So they encounter the problem way more than people my age who can avoid such activities. I can afford a cab if I want to drive home at night.
Sure.
A 17-year-old can't.
You mentioned CDU. Several days ago or weeks ago, this party, which is right now the most popular one in the polls, it voted with AfD in a bill regarding migration and restricting border controls. So how was it perceived by the German society and the German political establishment? Because before that, there was let's say, a rule that the main parties should not vote along with AfD. So that was broken. So what was the reaction?
It was in the political establishment, it was sort of a shock, but it's not true that it hasn't happened before. Every party has voted with the AfD on several levels, local and on the Bundesländer, on the federal state levels. They all voted on several occasions together with the AfD. And it was nevertheless perceived as a shock because it was clear before, as you said, normally they would agree that they wouldn't vote together with the AfD if it's clear that it's only the introduction of a law can only be won via the votes of the AfD. So they would normally not follow through with that. But in this situation, the AfD maneuvered them into something because they said that they will take the CDU, the Conservative Party proposal, and bring it in. So it's very difficult for the CDU to vote against it if it's their own proposal. So they said, we can't vote against it, even if they bring it in. So we bring it in ourselves, and we want you to vote with us, which would have been possible because the other parties already agreed on the subject matter. But then it's election times. We're in an election campaign. They said never. And it was sort of a very difficult mix. I think in the general population, the shock was not that big. But in the political establishment, it was seen as a huge shift.
And we spoke with many Germans on the streets. We made a lot of vox pops here in different cities of Germany. And we asked the people what they think about political parties, which one is the best for Germany. And many times we get the answer, none. So
that's true.
So it means that they don't put trust in the political establishment anymore. And I think the fact that the coalition was broken a couple of months ago, it was something that hadn't happened for many years in Germany.
Yeah, true.
So do you think that really the Germans, they believe they don't have a party to vote for?
Yes, that's something I hear all the time. I mean, there's no party where people would say that really covers their interests. So somebody restricting migration, but with a program that is a humanistic approach, not a racist approach, but just purely humanistic, because it would also be humanistic to stop people before they come here and die on the way. It's the other topic. Very important topic is the economy. So there are not many programs and not really many election campaigns about the economy. I mean, a sensible project. So people are sort of in the middle of not knowing what to do. And it's also a game of, if I vote for the CDU, will they stay on track? Or will they change back to the old Merkel ways? And people do not want that. So it's a matter of trust mainly, yeah. What kind of coalition will they form after the election? And
do you think that smaller parties that are not represented in Bundestag, like Volt, for example, or the party which is called the Party, Die Partei, do you think they have any chance to actually get more voters and be in the Bundestag in the future? Because they are very active, and many people, they actually say they want to vote for them.
I do not think that they have a chance this time. Maybe in 4 years. But as you said, I mean, the coalition breaking up, which was a shock for Germans. If you see the political landscape in other European countries, is way more fractured than ours. So you have newcomer parties. Macron was a disruption in France. He sort of killed the Conservative Party in France, which is reduced to a very small party, was the biggest party of Chirac. And that sort of is just starting in Germany. And it very much depends on the next 4 years if they follow through with some of the policies that people want, mainly migration and security. Or if not, then a lot of smaller parties will have a bigger chance to get into parliament, and also the right-wing and the left-wing parties will get more votes if the democratic parties are not able to change course.
All right, let's discuss the international relations of Germany. I think I will start from the relations and ties with the USA, which is one of the most important partners for Germany. And we have Donald Trump in Washington, and he's very coercive towards his neighbors like Canada and Mexico. But he also says he wants to impose tariffs on Europe, and it would definitely hit Germany. And he also forces Germany and other European countries to pay more money for security. So how do you think this impacts the social perception of America and the perception of this country in the political establishment?
Well, in the population, the perception is that Trump is very different from all other politicians that we have seen before. People are very wary about what he's going to do. The general population is not very much in favor of spending more on defense, which has to do a lot with the conflict of Ukraine and Russia, because half of the German population does see the need to support Ukraine. The other half does not, which is a huge discussion going on. And the feeling is that we're not in danger. So people are not aware that it might be useful to spend more on defense because we might get attacked. Actually, we are attacked already on different levels, but not on a military level. So we attacked via propaganda and so on, but that is not perceived as a threat. In the political establishment, I think that nobody's very happy about Trump. Although I think the change in the CDU has to do with the disruption that Trump represents, that they realize if you do not change track, if you do not pick up what people are really talking about, then you might be in for a surprise in the elections. And that is something Trump shows, because nobody thought in his first term that he could win. Everybody dismissed him. And now he won the second time. So it's a warning to politicians to really take voters seriously, I think.
And I think there are two approaches to Donald Trump, how to deal with the problems he might do. So one of them is to actually align with the demands to buy more LNG, for example, from America, and maybe also reduce the tariffs for American cars in the European Union. But the other is that Europe actually should be more strategically sovereign and to be more coercive, to also impose tariffs on America. And what I heard is that EU actually wants to cooperate pragmatically with Donald Trump. So they are probably going to win, but they will have to make a coalition. So what do you think? What will be the future? Which of those approaches will be actually implemented?
I'm not sure which one will be implemented, but there's another card that Trump can play and that you haven't mentioned in the security field. Most of the attacks are stopped here due to the information we get from the US. Because due to data protection within the EU, our security services are not able to scan the internet, to scan private conversations and so on. So we rely heavily on the information from Israel and the US to stop attacks. That is a very expensive thing they're doing. So to have the AI crawl the internet and find out who's going to threaten a terrorist attack is costly. And it could be, because it's Trump's mindset to deal, that they say either you spend more on defense, but you also spend more on data protection and you pay us for those hints. So we have to spend more anyway. either way, either you spend more to be more self-reliant or you spend more to pay the Americans. But either way, you have to spend more. And somewhat in this direction, I think we have to think about our own security. What are we prepared to spend for it? What are we prepared to do? We are not able, Germany is not able at the moment to defend itself without the help of the Americans, which is clear. So either way, we have to figure out a way to deal with that. And you see the approach Trump is taking on Ukraine. Give me something, you get something. And that is what he's going to do with the European Union and also with Germany. And Germany is one of the richest countries within the EU, so they can't really back out. And I'm sure that they will raise defense spending.
And what can be expected from Trump is also that he will demand from Germany to cut the ties, economical ties with China. And German car companies, for example, they benefit a lot in this country. But I think among the European countries, the risking approach is more popular. But the current American establishment wants rather to do it as a decoupling, so cut the ties completely. And taking into consideration that Germany has many problems and some pillars of economy, several of them, they've fallen. For example, the cheap gas from Russia, cheap labor from China is falling. So do you think that it will be a huge problem for Germany? And do you think that Germany will find a new economical model for the future?
Well, I'm an economist by training, so I would hope that they do. There's two sides of that. One side is that the realization of a threat, that there's a threat coming with the economic ties of China, is very low here. So it's not perceived as a threat, even in the political establishment. We do have in our Ministry of the Interior a new department for hybrid threats, and they do a lot of work on China. And even when they brief our members of parliament, they're quite dismissed. So the realization that there's not only an economic cost coming or economic gains coming with the relations to China, but a huge security cost is not there yet. In the general population, it's not being discussed very much, hybrid threats. It's not being perceived as a direct threat that could endanger the German economy. I think it would be possible to decouple. I'm very much for decoupling, to be honest. I'm very radical on that way because the axis of resistance, China, Russia, Iran, in my view, is a threat to our inner security. And we should do something about it. But at the moment, especially the German economic organizations are very much against it for several reasons, because they say that as long as we have strict labor rules in Germany, which do not allow to lower or raise wages, to fire people and so on, they're not flexible enough to deal with the problem. So there's a need to really reform the whole labor market and the economic system to get back on track. Germany still has the potential. We are in the top 4 of tech companies. So there is potential, but then people also need the freedom to pursue economic goals. And that has very much been reduced during the last 10 years.
So let's discuss the relations within the European Union, because I think this is also very important in terms of security, but also economy. So there were some rifts in terms of economy because Germany wants to subsidize or help with the government money its own companies. The French are against because they are not as rich as the Germans, and it caused some problems. Also, we see different approaches to the future of the European community, because I think some countries, they want the federalization, and this is what Olaf Scholz, for example, he stands for. But countries in the eastern flank of NATO, but also European Union, they would rather see Europe as a Europe of nations. And also we see problems regarding the Schengen zone, because many parties in Germany, especially CDU, they want to close the borders, which will be, which some experts they perceive as the end of Schengen zone, actually. So do you think that it may cause problems in the future? We also see different issues like common debt, common security spending, and so on. So a lot of topics I mentioned here, and the floor is yours.
Let's start with the last one, with the Schengen area. I do not think that it will break up the Schengen area if if several countries close their borders. Look at Switzerland. Switzerland is part of the Schengen area, not of the European Union, but part of the Schengen area. And they sort of closed their borders years ago. And they're very strict on migration. So they're deporting criminals, for example, and it never caused any problems. As long as the UK was part of the EU, it was not part of the Schengen area. So they always controlled their borders. Not very strict, but there were border controls whenever you went to the UK. So it's not really related. A common migration policy and border controls to cooperation. You can cooperate still if you close your national borders. That's not a really huge problem. It is a problem within the EU with the redistribution mechanism. So once you close your borders, for example, we force Poland to close its borders and then keep the migrants there because they were forced in Poland, and Germany argues, well, it's your responsibility. That, of course, causes problems. But they already, with the new reform of the asylum system, developed a system that you can buy your way out. So there are compromises. And in terms of the economy, debts, subsidies, and so on, well, the two biggest European countries are France and Germany. And in France, you have a very different approach to state ownership. I mean, 60% of the economy in France, more than 60%, is somewhat caused by the state. It's a state-driven economy. And you have huge protests once you want to, for example, prolong the years you have to work, lower the pensioners, lower pensions, and so on. So there are social problems in France, and they need to reform the economy as much as we do. But I think the problems are greater in France. And in Germany, there's sort of a battle of preference for systems. At the moment, both the right-wing and the left-wing parties opt for a very state-driven economy. So they promise people that with the argument, we are a rich country, you will get what you want. Don't worry, there will be pensions forever, you will have a good life, and it's not reflected in the daily experience of people. So people can't afford to buy a house anymore, they can't afford holidays twice a year, things like that. So the promises and the perceived reality are somewhat going apart, and people are getting very worried about their economic status. And I think as long as European countries are on a very different levels with very different problems in employment and so on, it's more realistic to have a union of nation states. But we have to think about defense and security to find common ground there, especially regarding hybrid threats. But I think economically, it's not very wise to join the countries with such different populations, different potential. For example, your growth is way better than that of the old countries, let's say, because you have more potential, you have younger people, you have very good educated people. So of course you have a lot of potential and a lot of drive, and it would also be bad to stop that. So we have to find a way to cooperate on important matters like security without imposing economic policy on everyone at the same time, because that will worsen the damage in some countries and stop other countries from growing.
So in your opinion, it would be better to, let's say, align with the strategic plans of NATO, but keep the spending, let's say, national, right? So not the common debt among the European Union for defense spending.
Yes, I think that will not. I mean, if you if you do it on an EU level, then several countries might be tempted not to pay what they're due to the NATO, and that would cause huge problems. Mm-hmm. And also, it is necessary to get your populations behind. I mean, we have to start discussing important problems publicly. We have to discuss the aggression of Russia. We have to discuss what it means for our inner security and so on. And as long as we do not do that, of course, everybody can feel safe. But I think we're past the point of being safe. So we need to get the discussion started. And once we do that, I think you have popular support for defense spending.
So regarding Ukraine, how do you think the German people, they actually perceive this conflict? Maybe at the beginning, I think in the whole Western world, everyone was supporting the Ukrainians. But I think in Poland and in many countries, people are getting tired of this topic. They don't want to listen about Ukraine anymore. How it works in Germany. We spoke with some people. They said actually it should stop, and we should not help the refugees as much as we help them so far. So what do you think? What the Germans actually, how they perceive this conflict?
Well, it's perceived as something that has nothing to do with Germany, mostly. As you said, people are tired of hearing from the war. They are tired also of hearing from the war in the Middle East. It's very much perceived as something that does not threaten our security, especially not our inner security. And the German population, according to the polls, is very much divided between half of them is in support of Ukraine, half of them is not, but it's not very much in the headlines nowadays. So and also what I think is true, that people know that Germany is not a very, although we do play a role in delivering weapons, it's not the main factor that will end the war. So the pressure of the US is way more important than whatever Germany can contribute, because security-wise, Germany is not a heavyweight.
Mm. And how about helping Ukraine militarily? Because the current coalition was against, for example, sending the most advanced offensive weapons like the terrorist missile systems. But how about CDU, which is going to win probably the election? Is it somehow different than this current coalition?
Well, their candidate, Friedrich Merz, is saying very publicly that he will deliver the towers. And I think he means it. He has on several occasions been pressured on his support for Ukraine, and he's always been very clear that he supports Ukraine and that he sees Russia as the aggressor and that you have to take a stronger stance against Russia. Whereas, especially in the SPD, the Socialist Party, the stance is very different. It was sort of, yes, we support them as long as we get the backing of the US. But now, during the election campaign, their candidate, the current Chancellor, Scholz, changed track and said we cannot support Ukraine if our people are not getting as much money as they need for their daily lives. So he sort of is a populist approach. He sort of pitched the money going to Ukraine against spending, domestic spending. And that is the way he's going.
This is what happened in the US actually before the elections also.
Exactly, yeah. And I think he knows what he's doing because he's getting popular support for that. It's a huge part of the German population saying, why would we spend money on Ukraine?
If we have problems, right?
If we have problems domestically, yeah. I think that's not the way to look at it, but it's an election topic.
And taking into consideration that one of the possible scenarios, and very probable one, is the Grand Coalition, so the next one, the CDU and SPD. Do you think that the amount of money and military aid given to Ukraine will increase?
I could imagine that if it's a big coalition, again, then it could be that they compromise on closing the borders in exchange for not giving Ukraine the support they need. Because it's within the SPD, it's a huge topic to stop that aid. They have a lot of fractions, a lot of politicians who are very much aligned with Russia. So that might be the compromise. I fear that this is the compromise compromise, but I'm not sure. I mean, actually, the discussion is very much that Merz will go into a coalition with the Green Party if they have enough votes. And interestingly enough, with the Green Party, the migration issue will be more wobbly because they're not for closing the borders, but they're very much in support of Ukraine. So on security-wise, they align more with the Green Party than with the SPD. So it's open.
We can't say right now, but the SPD is getting more popular, as you said, so
exactly.
it might change the political landscape. Okay, my last topic, but of course not least, on the contrary, very big, it's Russia, actually, and the future of the relations between Russia and Germany. Financial Times has recently reported that there are talks within the European Union, supported by some German politicians, to actually bring back the issues of buying gas from Russia again. And it should somehow, they believe, incentivize Putin to the talks, to the peace talks, which might be undertaken soon regarding Ukraine. So it sounds a bit naive from Polish perspective, and it sounds like a business as usual. So do you think this is a good idea? And do you believe that really happens? Because it was only reported by the media.
Well, there is a huge discussion about reopening and getting gas from Russia again. It's mainly brought forward by Sarah Wagenknecht, who formed a new party getting out of the far left. She's very much pro-Russia, and she's, I think, in every other interview demanding that we import gas again from Russia. I mean, there's a practical issue because the gas pipeline is destroyed and will not be repaired for a very long time. I think it would be a huge mistake because every time you give Putin's Russia something that they want, you're going to lose, because the only language he understands in security-wise is strength. So every time you threaten him, he's going to get more wary and careful. Every time you give him something, he's going to attack. That's what he's done in the past. So I think it would be a huge mistake, but that is not the view, because the view is still, he might attack Ukraine further, he might attack Georgia, but not us. Yeah, so the perception is we are a strong country. He's never going to attack us. And of course, somebody like Sarah Wagenknecht is always arguing he has been attacked by the West, which of course is not true.
This is the Russian perspective and propaganda, actually.
Exactly. The propaganda took root here, and it took root so deeply that sort of pro-peace, pro-Russia rallies are very, very huge here. And even popular feminist groups changed track and said that we are pro-peace, and therefore the war should stop on Putin's terms, and he's not the only aggressor. So the propaganda here worked. They did it for years and years, also on migration, by the way, and it took root in the heads of the German population. I think that is why I'm saying we need to have a public discussion about security, because it's the same thing towards Iran. We're still dealing with Iran. They're still holding Germans hostage. They just recently released one hostage, killed another one, but they're still holding Germans hostage. Most of the European countries got their hostages out. We didn't. We had a very costly deal with Russia to get some of the hostages out and let a terrorist go. So we need to discuss the security issues and how to deal with them and develop a strategy against a threat, because it's not only military-wise that you invade another country, which of course is a catastrophe, but it's also via propaganda, via buying politicians or influencing politicians in other ways. They're mainly not being bought, but being promised to become more influential. And it's something that's not perceived as a direct threat to daily lives, and also not related to refugee problems. And Russia has a lot to do with the migration question. Youth have the experience with migrants coming via Belarus, but that is not being perceived here as a game that Russia plays, although they're meddled in Syria, where a huge part of our migrants come from. So all these kind of connections are not being made here. And I think that is why we have to discuss them publicly. Germany is very self-centered, you see. It's very much domestic policy. It's not international policy because we are such a huge country. So it's domestic policy first and then international policy. But you can't divide the two nowadays. You have to think foreign and domestic policy together because it's a threat that overlaps.
And regarding Russian propaganda, do you believe that actually the tools of Russian soft power in Germany, which were very present here, according to various journalistic investigations, especially they were very active in Germany. There were many so-called NGOs and different institutions that actually helped to spread Russian propaganda and, let's say, make some ties between Russia and German politicians, especially SPD. We know, obviously, the most important example is Gerhard Schröder, the former German chancellor, who then was a part of advisory board of Gazprom, right? So it shows something. Do you think that they are still active after 2022? Because it was the, let's say, red line which should separate the ties, and it happened in many sectors. For example, energy. So do you think in terms of soft power, is Russia still powerful in Germany?
Yes, they are. They didn't stop financing the think tanks. They're still influencing politics on a huge scale. They're influencing press reporting, although Russia Today, which was, of course, a very basic propaganda tool, is prohibited now in Germany, but there are other ways to influence people, and they still do it. Interestingly enough, a French diplomat just told me they introduced a law in France that makes it obligatory for think tanks to say who's financing them from foreign donors if it's more than 10,000 euros from one donor, or if they have more donations than 250,000 a year. And one of the biggest foreign sponsor in France was the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, there are not a lot of Russian Orthodox Christians in France, so you can imagine why they do that. And it would be interesting to see the same numbers for Germany, but we don't have that kind of law. But I guess that the amount they're spending on Germany is even higher than on France. And there's also a study from the European Commission on anti-feminism relating to abortion, who's financing these sort of campaigns. And they found a lot of organizations being financed by Russia. So propaganda is working, and it's not only propaganda, but it's also NGO work. It's, of course, influencing operations like in Sweden, the Quran burning. There was a recent report that those who sprayed Magen Davids, the Jewish symbols on buildings in Germany, was also an influence operation by Russia. So they're doing a lot of provocations to disrupt inner security, to stir up dissent, to stir up violence within our countries. So there's direct meddling still. So
what's the best way to deal with this problem? Because Germany, of course, is an open country with the freedom of speech. So repressing those organizations may be perceived as, let's say, being against democracy and the values that we represent here in Europe. So how can democratic countries fight back?
Transparency laws. You have to introduce transparency laws that obligate NGOs, all kinds of NGOs, not only political NGOs, but also sports clubs and so on, to publish their financial statements up from 10,000 euro per donor, from the amount, for example, of 250,000 budget a year. You have to lay out who's financing you, how much money you get from which donor, and who's financing you from foreign countries, which also goes for Islamism, by the way. So we would know who's going to finance which organization from Qatar or Kuwait or Turkey. And you have to lay open who is in your management board and advisory board. A lot of organizations do not do that. And those members, where are their members also, so that you see the network? And that would help a huge deal. I mean, I agree, you can't suppress certain opinions. We're a free country. You can also be pro-Russian. That is legal.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you are a lobby organization, then you should,
be open about it.
Be open about it. You should say who's going to finance you and whose voice you're reporting. Also, for example, we know that from the far left and the far right, there have been conferences. For example, there were some young politicians from the AfD being invited to Tehran where they met Dugin on conferences. So there is a lot of cooperation from dictatorships against our democracies, and it should at least be brought to light.
I said Russia is going to be our last topic, but I forgot about my own country, about Poland. Sorry for that. So do you think that German-Polish relations is something that is important for the Germans before the elections? How do they prioritize those relations? I think we are the Poland for Germany and Germany for Poland are the most important, let's say, business partners, or in the group of the most important ones. So do you think this is, let's say, discussed in Germany, perceived in Germany, and important for the German voters and establishment?
To be honest, not at all. I mean, there were some headlines when the anti-German rhetoric was strong in Poland, but even then, it was not a main topic here. It depends on incidents. If there are incidents at the border, then of course it's being reported here. If there are huge demonstrations in the streets, if there's a discussion about the judicial system, you will find some news, but it's nothing that in any way influences the German debate. Also because, as I said, Germans are very self-centered. It's 80 million people looking at domestic policy, not so much on foreign policy. And I think they don't, if you would ask the majority who's at the head of Poland at the moment, probably most people wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that depending on who is going to rule in Germany after the elections, is the policy towards Poland going to change, or will we still the same, let's say, maintain good trade relationships and maybe discuss some security issues regarding eastern flank of NATO?
Well, I think if the Conservative Party forms a coalition that is strong on security issues, it will change. Also, at least there is the notion within the political establishment that we wronged the Polish establishment, because a lot of times for many years the Polish warnings were dismissed, and everybody knows now that that was wrong. I mean, they were right to warn about Russia. They were right to warn about the danger of Ukraine being invaded. So at least people know that they made a huge mistake dismissing Polish warnings. If the SPD is being at the helm of a new coalition, which still can happen, then I think nothing will change, unfortunately. But I very much hope it will.
Yeah, we'll see after the elections. Thank you very much for this very insightful interview, all the information you've given us and me and our viewers regarding the German internal situation, but also international relations now and in the future. Rebecca Schönenbach, and a German expert in the field of international relations and security policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
And many thanks to our viewers. Goodbye.